Sure. So we are a pretty high volume reference website. So the goals for us are probably a little bit different than somebody who might be e-commerce. Typically people come and rely on us for looking up definitions and synonyms. It's really kind of our bread and butter between the dictionary and the thesaurus side. So from a business point of view, obviously that is our mission. We want to be a resource for education and for literacy. From a business standpoint, of course, we are largely ad supported. That's a primary source of revenue. So, we think about ways to optimize the page to be able to try to get people to spend more time going to different pages. Like another big reference site, Wikipedia, is famous for getting people going down Wikipedia rabbit holes. So we'd love to be doing the same stuff for etymology and words. Things that get people to spend a little bit more time on the page. So those things help us as well. So, from an analytics standpoint, we're using analytics in a few ways. One is it's just, tracking KPIs, tracking revenue, tracking performance. Do we have certain ads that are getting low viewability where we need to make some tweaks and adjustments on it? We also love to use our analytics just as part of general research, for the content team. It's often the case that there are really stories kind of within the data that we find. A really good example of that recently for us was we just had our word of the year towards the end of last year, which is always a fun time of year for us. And we chose the word woman as the word of the year. And the big reason we did was that we looked at the data, and there were a few of these key events where, the very definition of the word woman became a pretty major story. A big one was Ketanji Brown Jackson when she was confirmed to the Supreme Court. Somebody asked her, "Can you define woman?" Which, she, in a legal context, didn't try to provide an exact definition. But when that happened as a dictionary, searches soared. Searches went over, I think, by a factor of about 14, what they usually are. And we saw it happen a few other times in the year too, just related to certain events. With, certainly with trans rights being at the forefront of so many things, that definition of woman has really become this flashpoint. So, but yeah, it did come down to the data for us picking that, because the more we looked at it, the more of an obvious pick it was. But we do love when we can do things like that. I mean, there's oftentimes just some really interesting stories that surface just in the words that people look up and how those change over time. Um, yeah, well, I mean, they've been really an industry standard tool in analytics for a long, long time. So, they've got the trusted brand and the reputation, a wonderful community behind it. Which is always nice, having kind of that level of support where you can meet other practitioners. It's a great benefit of a conference like this, because I can meet other people that have already pushed the tool a lot farther than I have, and it's a great place to get ideas in that way. We came from a world where we were running on more of a kind of homegrown system that we'd use to do click tracking, which, you get some advantages on that of the customization. But losing out on kind of that community of support was one of the big reasons why we decided to move beyond that and implement Adobe instead. Sure. Well, I'm coming into it fairly green, so I may cite something that you all have already addressed. But one that comes to mind for me is, so our site has about 250,000 definitions pages on dictionary.com. We've got about 150,000 synonym pages across thesaurus.com. So very high volume of pages, as you can imagine. Most of these are pretty low traffic. You've got maybe that top 5-10% are really driving a huge amount of traffic, but then you have all these really obscure things out there. There's still a lot of important information you can get there, and oftentimes in our Adobe reporting suite, it'll kind of bundle things at low traffic at a pretty low threshold for us to get to. So that can be a limitation when we're trying to do some really detailed keyword analysis. The way we've gotten around that is, we make use of the data feed and the export. So, we make the data available to our analysts in more of that raw state. So when they really do need to truly get into that weedsy data, we don't run into that low traffic limitation. So far, pretty positive view of it. I'm going to go with a 9. Sure. Where it's particularly well suited, I mean, um, drive figuring out just the ins and outs of how we drive traffic to certain editorial articles that we're using. That word of the year was a good example of that. We have a team of lexicographers that a few times a year put out, collections of new entries. The thing about a dictionary is, even in the old days when it was just print dictionaries, the day it goes into print is the day it starts going out of date. It really does just have to constantly be updated. So we have a lot of good content that comes from the lexicography team about which words are getting updates and why that is. So yeah, we try to put some thought based on sometimes that can influence how they organize their queue. Because if they're finding words that are particularly high volume, that might be a good reason to kind of get that up in the work queue relative to where something else might be. For example, I know the team got really excited recently. Only the kind of thing the lexicographers can get excited about, but the word "at" can now be a verb because of all the use in Twitter of "don't at me." So they added a separate entry for "at" to be a verb, which that's just one of those words that you never even think about. Yeah. So they got real jazzed about it. So again, I'd say with using the tool, we love using it to spark ideas, and to dig up ideas. It's testing our own performance. For example, we had to make some changes to our crossword last year, so we were keeping a very close eye on session duration and how long people were taking. And that time on duration, the duration on page, I actually like how Adobe has it set up in their reporting because you can do it kind of bucketed into groups, or you kind of run your straight average, which is helpful because that sort of data, you always have some wonky outliers that can skew it. So I find it really helpful to be able to kind of show that distribution because if you take something like our crossword puzzle in games, that's something where we hope people can come play word games, learn, but obviously there are ads going along the side too. So we want to maximize that time. So we use the tool to see, okay, if we've made these changes, is time going up or down, and we can adjust based on that. Still pretty early for it, so I'd say it's still taking shape. It does. A big one for us is it's just helping us pull back on some pretty complex technical debt that were associated with the legacy tool. So that's one place I know where we're realizing some gains right out of the gate. But yeah, I mean, I would say our team very regularly finds ideas like, well, we came across this kind of obscure game that was pretty well hidden on our site. We've had it for a long time, like a word puzzle game, and found that it only had like one ad on it. But then we started looking at the data and saying, there's actually a lot of people using this and they're spending a decent amount of time on it. So right away, that's low hanging fruit of, oh, hey, we could be doing a little bit more to promote this game and monetize it. Let's see. So I go back with a previous job. I used what used to be Core Metrics and IBM Digital Analytics. So I think I was working with that a lot between about 2012 and 2018, 2019 or so. I mean, of course, Google Analytics is ubiquitous. We've all got it implemented in some form. So definitely still use that, although primarily more for validation and to kind of have that secondary check. I mean, the thing about clickstream and web analytics data is you're only going to get so much accuracy. So sometimes you do just find those weird scenarios where it's nice to have that second tool to get that gut check to see, okay, we're measuring it this way with this tool, but does that still line up? Isn't it close enough? We still feel good about the findings. Generally speaking, stronger. The IBM tool that we used. I mean, it had some nice things going for it, but they ended up spinning it off to a different company, and so it was just one of those things that wasn't really getting the product development. Whereas Adobe Analytics is very obviously continuously driving the product forward. So I do think it's head and shoulders above that tool we were using. With Google Analytics, I mean, there's a little bit of an apples and oranges nature to them. I certainly prefer using Adobe as a primary tool. Google, I think even with the 360 products, sometimes you run into some weird things with sampling. So again, I think we're definitely comfortable relying on Adobe as the primary tool. So the most important features of Adobe Analytics, well, this is a broad one, but the whole workspace. The idea that we can set up the workspace in such a way that, and I mean, I've found this working in other analytics teams and other companies, that you want to be able to do self-serve analytics for the people that want to do it. But the reality of it is that not everybody wants to get into that level of detail and get into the weeds. I do feel like Adobe's workspace is very well suited where I'm really comfortable, helping train some of our folks that have that interest in being able to do their own research, to get in and poke around, which always for a reporting team, that definitely makes us happy when when the stuff's being used. Yes. Yes. Um, a lot of it was kind of sold internally by people as opposed to directly from Adobe. So I think it ended up coming because we had a couple of relatively new team members who had worked heavily with it at other organizations. So that was the best selling point for us. So I'd say yes. I certainly didn't get any misleading information running into it or anything like that. Yes, yeah, I would say so. I think it was easier than I thought it was going to be, but I don't want to do a disservice to our engineers who are making it look easy because I'm sure there's plenty happening behind the scenes. But it at least has gone through with, fingers crossed, not too many hiccups along the way. Although I was at one of the sessions earlier and they were talking about implementations and how they're never really done. so so I'm sure there are things that we're just going to keep on tuning. But yeah, I mean, in terms of once we kind of made the call to ramp this up, timelines to get it implemented, I've been pretty happy.